President Sisi addressed the nation on Thursday, marking the third anniversary of June 30th revolution. In his televised speech, the president said the 30th of the June revolution, the Egyptians succeeded in restoring their identity and corrected the path. He noted that Egyptian people proved that their will cannot be broken. They reaffirmed their ability to overcome all challenges and difficulties. The president asserted that it was the unity of the Egyptian people that enabled them to face the challenges. President al-Sisi said also that the 30th of June revolution showed no party can enforce its will on the Egyptian people. He noted that the will of the Egyptian people is the real momentum and pushing forward in the developmental process. Al-Sisi also warned that the challenges facing the country are huge, adding that he was keen to deal with all of the challenges facing all sectors of society and to achieve the aspirations of the Egyptian people. The president also hailed all the martyrs who sacrificed their lives while protecting the country and promised to always look after their families. Egypt marks on Thursday the third anniversary of the June 30th revolution. Marking this occasion, many events are planned all over the country, while museums and parks are open for free for the public. 3 years after have passed ever since huge crowds of Egyptians rallied to oust the Brotherhood President Mohammed Morsi and his regime. On June 30th, 2013, millions took to the streets of Cairo and other cities to call for the removal of Morsi, whose rule had been deeply divisive. According to calculated numbers counted through helicopters scanning across the country, this was the biggest protest in Egypt's history, with at least 40 million protesters. The uprising concluded 7 months of demonstrations that started when the Brotherhood government issued a controversial draft constitution that gave him sweeping unlimited powers over the state's judicial system. The demonstrations' hopes were fulfilled on July 3rd when the army stepped in for the second time in less than 3 years in support of the people's will. In May the next year, Sisi was elected democratically as a president with almost 97% of the vote. And for more on Egypt's celebrations marking the third anniversary of June 30th revolution, we're joined over the phone by Dr. Huda Rizana, the political analyst. Good afternoon, Dr. Rizana.
Hello, good afternoon. It's a nice day to celebrate, of course.
Of course, it's a very nice day to celebrate, but analyzing, we were just observing President Sisi's speech to the Egyptians and also celebrating with Egyptians 3 years after the revolution. He talked about challenges. In your own assessment, how do you see the challenges back then after June 30th? And how effectively did we succeed as Egyptians under the rule or reign of President Sisi to overcome these challenges?
Well, it's evident that the President himself is lining a road to continue for the progress of the development and continuous processing and the various fields. For production and for continuous education and for also employment and for caring for the underprivileged groups and the new housing for the areas which was left for many years undeveloped, and it was like a very dangerous field for crimes and for criminals and for also terrorism to develop. And we are overcoming this by the plans he was putting, and he was insisting to persuade the people to develop their also abilities to go in these lines, because a lot of people in Egypt were losing faith, losing interest, losing power. So he is the one giving power and perseverance to these groups. Also the young and the youth generations were also motivated. So motivation for the Egyptian is very important, and sustainable development is evident in a lot of areas. Areas of agriculture, areas for developing new industrial areas and industrial zones, and also for helping the areas who are not been taken care for maybe 40 years ago. So I think this president was highlighting all these areas for development and also sustaining and asking the people to believe and to encourage the young and all the areas of Egypt to be developed, not under auspice of investment only, but also for the Upper Egypt areas and the agriculture areas.
Right.
So I think this is very, very evident in the speech, and we are making sure that we are processing on the right tracks.
Right, Dr. Anna,
defeating terrorism and defeating people who are just talking to get the people down and in a depressive way.
Right, Dr. Anna, as we are celebrating 3 years, only 3 years after June 30th revolution, but in these 3 years we have witnessed, mega projects, infrastructural projects, many developmental projects, power stations that were affected, the 1.5 million fedans, the new Suez Canal project, and all the energy projects, even the economic agreements that were signed by leading economic powers. Lots of things, if we keep numbering them, it won't end, only in 3 years. So how do you assess the developmental process or roadmap only in 3 years that way?
Well, it's we are having a high score, of course, in the eyes of the whole world, because we are achieving these steps with a strong president, and he has a vision. So this is the issue, that he got the vision and he has the power to continue in many roads, not only in one direction. You mentioned by yourself the roads and the development of Suez Canal and area of economical investment around the new Suez Canal areas. Investment road process. The agriculture also, the 2.5 million fedan for agriculture is promising a new future for Egypt.
And the housing projects.
A beautiful and glowing future. Also, we need also to sustain in our steps and be sure that we're going to achieve what we have as a target, and our goals will be evident to the whole world that we are people not talking, but we are a doer. If you are a doer, your deeds will talk about you, not the words you are talking about. So this is something I can see, and the whole world, everybody is astonished, because everybody was expecting failure, and because we have a lot of drops and a lot of kicks back, either from the terrorist group or the accident or the defeating us in the area of tourism. All that we are overcoming this, and we are trying to be to increase our capabilities and capacity to achieve our goals.
Right.
So I think this is what are we celebrating, is that we prove to the whole world that we are developing our country in scientific and economical and investment areas which were absent in our vision for Egypt.
Right.
So we are right now on the right track.
Right.
So congratulations for Egypt and for our president, or for our society, and wishing them everything good.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Hoda Rizana, former member of parliament and the political analyst, and resuming our news after 30th of June revolution. Egypt created its roadmap with a pivotal referendum to adopt a modern constitution embodying the will of Egyptian people, protecting rights and safeguarding freedoms. The constitution was followed by the other two steps of the roadmap: the presidential elections in May, that was in 2014, and the parliamentary elections in October and December 2015, and we have more details coming up.
The 30th of June 2013 revolution ended one-year presidency of Mohamed Morsi after millions of protesters across Egypt took to the streets and demanded his immediate resignation. The rallies were partly in response to Tomorrow Day movement that launched a petition in April earlier that year calling for the government to step down and collected more than 22 million signatures. Egypt's transition was moving forward with confidence and firm determination despite the enormity of the challenge. Egypt created its roadmap with a pivotal referendum to adopt a modern constitution embodying the will of the Egyptian people, protecting rights and safeguarding freedoms, and were followed by presidential and parliamentary elections. The Constitution of the Arab Republic of Egypt is a fundamental law of the country. The Egyptian Constitution of 2014 was passed in a referendum in January 2014, as it took effect after the results were announced on the 18th of the same month. The Constitution set up a president and parliament. The president is elected to 4 terms and may serve 2 terms. Under the Constitution, there is a guarantee of equality between the genders and an absolute freedom of belief, but Islam is the state religion. Meanwhile, a presidential election in Egypt took place between May 26th and 28th in 2014. There were only 2 candidates, former Defense Minister Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and journalist Hamid Sabahi. The candidates were able to apply for nomination to the presidency between the 31st of March and the 20th of April. The final list of candidates approved by the Supreme Election Committee was announced on the 2nd of May. The elections, which were planned to take place for 2 days, were extended to a 3rd. Official figures showed more than 25 million citizens voted in the elections, a turnout of 47.5%, with President al-Sisi winning with 23.78 million votes, or 96.91%. For the 3rd and last step of Egypt's roadmap, the parliamentary election to the House of Representatives were held in 2 phases from 17th of October to the 2nd of December 2015. The parliament is made up of 596 seats, with 448 seats elected through individual candidacy systems, 120 elected through winner-takes-all party lists, and 28 selected by the president. The elected parliament was entrusted with the task of reviewing the laws that were passed while a parliament was not in session. The country's roadmap has cemented justice, freedom, and democracy as fundamentals for its political climate.
Army since the beginning of the 25th of January revolution and after 30th of June revolution until the conclusion of political roadmap in the transitional period was hailed and appreciated by all Egyptians. The army led the country in such a pivotal stage in its modern history. More details in the following report.
On the 25th of January 2011, the Egyptian people took to the streets all over the country to protest against the shortcomings and failures of former President Hosni Mubarak, who ruled since 1981. Millions turned out in major cities across Egypt, especially in Cairo's Tahrir Square. In the beginning, tensions were high between the police and the protesters, with violence breaking out in Suez and Alexandria. The government took a hard line, using riot control tactics and shutting down communications. But by the 28th, the protests were continuing and the police had retreated. This is when the army first intervened, taking over the security role. As pressure rose on Mubarak, the scale of the protests continued to grow, especially on organized Friday rallies. On the 30th of January, the Egyptian Air Force F-16s flew over Cairo, sending a clear message to protesters that the army is present and watching. Meanwhile, the army deployed all over the country and was patrolling the streets. Mohammed Hussein Tantawi, the Minister of Defense and Commander-in-Chief of the Egyptian Armed Forces then, was seen with the protesters in Tahrir Square in downtown Cairo. Egyptian opposition leaders said that would negotiate an end to the crisis in talks held only with the army. As protests continued calling for Mubarak's resignation, he held a meeting with his military commanders at the time. Soldiers were then ordered to use live ammunition, but the army refused the order since it was present to protect the people. The army chief told protesters that they would not be fired upon. Meanwhile, helicopters monitored the protests and fighter jets repeatedly flew low over Tahrir Square. On the 10th of February, the army issued its first statement. It talked about protecting the ambitions of the Egyptian people. It also supported the legitimate demands of the people. Amid growing anger and rising numbers of protesters, Mubarak finally decided to step down on February 11th of 2011.
أيها المواطنون في هذه الظروف العصيبة.
Vice President Omar Suleiman announced that the presidency had been vacated and that the Army Council would run the country.
تخليه عن منصب رئيس الجمهورية وكلف المجلس الأعلى للقوات المسلحة لإدارة شؤون البلاد.
The Supreme Council for the Armed Forces, the SCAF, included experts who enjoyed high experience in various fields. The council suspended the constitution and dismantled both the parliament and the Shura Council. The army pledged to run the country for a 6-month transitional period and to perform constitutional and legislative amendments before the parliamentary and presidential elections. The army fulfilled its pledge after overseeing the transitional period, during which a new constitution was drawn, new parliament and Shura Council were elected, and a new elected president was sworn in. However, only 1 year after the Brotherhood President Mohamed Morsi was sworn in, people took to the streets again, expressing great disappointment and discontent in Morsi and his regime. Marking the 1-year anniversary of Mohamed Morsi's inauguration as president, the June 30th revolution started. Millions of protesters across Egypt took to the streets and demanded the immediate resignation of the president to correct the path of their revolution. The rallies were partly a response to Tamarrud, a grassroots movement that launched a petition in April earlier that year and collected more than 22 million signatures. According to calculated numbers counted through helicopter scanning across the country, this was the biggest protest in Egypt's history, with 14 million protesters. The demonstrations, which had started peacefully, turned violent in many places across the country. On the 1st of July, the army again intervened in response to calls by the Egyptian people to enforce their will, which was made clear in the huge numbers of protesters. The military then delivered a nationwide television and radio statement giving both the government and the opposition a 48-hour ultimatum to resolve the political crisis and meet the people's demands, or it would intervene to restore order. The following day, Morsi delivered an evening speech where he declared his rejection of the declaration, claiming he was the elected president who represented the will of the people. The same day, another statement was released on the official Facebook page of the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces entitled "The Final Hours." It read, "We swear by God that we are ready to sacrifice our blood for Egypt and its people against any terrorist, extremist or fool." On the night of the 3rd of July, General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, the head of the Egyptian Armed Forces, announced in a live televised address that Mohamed Morsi had been deposed and replaced by the head of the Constitutional Court, Adli Mansour, and that the constitution had also been suspended.
تشكيل لجنة عليا للمصالحة الوطنية من شخصيات.
General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi said, "The president's speech last night failed to meet and conform with the demands of the people, prompting the armed forces to consult with some of the symbols of national forces and the youth without excluding anyone. They agreed on a roadmap that includes initial steps that realize the building of a strong and coherent Egyptian society that does not exclude any of its sons and currents and that ends the state of conflict and division." He added the army was standing apart from the political process but was using its vision as the Egyptian people were calling for help and discharge its responsibility. The announcement of the removal of Morsi was met with cheers in Tahrir Square. Anti-Morsi protesters shouted Allahu Akbar and long live Egypt.
للحفاظ على سلامة وأمن مصر وشعبها العظيم. حفظ الله مصر وشعبها الأبي العظيم.
Egypt marks on Thursday the third anniversary of the June 30th revolution. 3 years have passed since huge crowds of Egyptians rallied to oust the Brotherhood President Mohamed Morsi and his regime. On June 30th, 2013, millions took to the streets and other cities to call for the removal of Morsi, whose rule have been very deeply divisive. More about the revolution, this report.
3 years ago, the Egyptian people decided their demands and drew their future. The armed forces supported the demands of the Egyptian people and backed the 30th of June revolution in 2013 as it did on the 25th of January 2 years earlier. After exactly 1 year in power, the Egyptian people put an end to the autocratic regime led by the terrorist brotherhood groups Mohamed Morsi. The 30th of June revolution was the result of the huge mistakes committed by this autocratic regime in a time in which the country was in need of every day to build and progress. Tahrir Square was not the core of the 30th of June revolution as it was in the 25th of January revolution, despite the strength of the crowd as the revolution spread all over the nation. Nearly every governorate saw its own demonstrations with big rallies taking place in several cities all over Egypt. During Morsi's rule, many mistakes were made by Morsi himself as well as his regime and aides, creating a strong division among the Egyptians. Morsi also failed to fulfill any part of his electoral program, which he promised to accomplish in 100 days. Egyptian people were frustrated by Morsi's year-long rule in which Egypt suffered economic problems, energy shortage, lack of security and diplomatic crises. Amid a climate dissent and division, Tamarrud movement was founded in April 2013 by young activists. They made a street campaign to collect signatures from Egyptians across the country, calling for Morsi's resignation, early presidential elections, and the start of a renewed constituent process. The much-anticipated day came on the 30th of June 2013, with mass protests across the country, marking the 1-year anniversary of Morsi's rule. On the 1st of July 2013, amid the chaos of the country was facing, the armed forces issued a televised statement. It said that everybody in Egypt and the world has witnessed the protest by the great Egyptian people that were meant to express their opinion in a peaceful and civilized way. The statement said everybody has seen the movement of the Egyptian people and heard their voice with the utmost degree of respect and interest. In a statement, the armed forces gave all political forces 48 hours to resolve the political crisis and fulfill the people's demands. Otherwise, the armed forces would present a future roadmap for the country. On the 2nd of July 2013, demonstrators were pouring across Egypt with the crisis still persists. On the 3rd of July 2013, Egyptian people had the final say as they ousted the autocratic regime. On the 3rd of July 2013 also, Minister of Defense Lieutenant General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi announced in a televised address that the demands of the Egyptian people were met.
تهيب القوات المسلحة بالشعب المصري العظيم بكافة أطيافه الالتزام بالتظاهر السلمي وتجنب العنف الذي يؤدي إلى مزيد من الاحتقان.
All participants agreed on the future map, which met all demands of the Egyptian people. The future map included steps for building a strong and coherent Egyptian society, which does not exclude any one of its sons and puts an end to the conflict and division.
Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry arrived on Wednesday in Ramallah to deliver a verbal message from President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi to Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. Shoukry was received by Palestinian Prime Minister Rami al-Hamdullah, where they discussed bilateral relations and means of boosting them on all fields. The Palestinian Prime Minister hailed Egypt's vital role in supporting the Palestinian cause in all international forums. Alhamdulillah also briefed Shoukry on the latest developments in the Gaza Strip and the efforts exerted in the fields of reconstruction process. The Egyptian top diplomat is to discuss with the Palestinian president the outcome of the ministerial meeting held in Paris on means of backing the presidential Israeli peace process. The talks also cover possible future steps to put the peace process back on track. Shoukry also reviews the outcome of his talks with a number of international figures on proposals for the resumption of peace talks. And an Egyptian-led investigative committee said Wednesday that data from one of the black boxes of a crashed Egypt airplane showed smoke alarms had sounded on board. The black box had been retrieved from the bottom of the Mediterranean after the Airbus A320 with 66 people on board plunged into the sea on May 16th, or 19th rather, while heading to Cairo from Paris. More details.
Investigators have downloaded data from one of the black box flight recorders on Egypt Air Flight MS-804 and are preparing to analyze it, bringing them closer to discovering what caused the jet to crash. The Airbus A320 plunged into eastern Mediterranean Sea en route from Paris to Cairo on the 19th of May, killing all 66 people on board. The cause of the crash remains unknown. Egypt's investigation committee said on Wednesday that information showed that the entire flight is recorded on the FDR since its takeoff from Charles de Gaulle Airport until the recording stopped at an altitude of 37,000 feet where the accident occurred. Search teams have salvaged both of the so-called black box flight recorders. Investigators are now preparing to analyze data from the flight data recorder. Recovered wreckage from the jet's front section showed signs of high temperature damage. The second black box, the cockpit voice recorder, is still being repaired, belonging to France's BEA Aircraft Accident Investigation Agency, where the data chips from both recorders were sent after the devices were retrieved from the Mediterranean earlier this month. The BEA is involved in the investigation because France is both the flight's point of origin and home to Airbus, the plane's manufacturer. 15 of those killed were French. A United States National Transport Safety Board investigator is also involved, since the plane's engines were built by a consortium led by a U.S. company. If intact, the cockpit recorder should reveal pilot conversations and any cockpit alarms, as well as other clues such as engine noise.